Hi, I am Steve Robbins, and I'm here today with Terry Brock, who is one of the top 1% of all speakers in the world, according to the National Speakers Association. So I am in awe and I bow down. Terry, thank you for joining us.
Well, Steve, it is great to be with you, my friend, and no bowing here. We're just all kids getting together, having fun time, learning about some wonderful things.
Awesome. So, speaking of wonderful things, the topic that we were going to talk about today was entrepreneurs and a strategy of living and let living. And, this is something where when I think back to business school, right, the whole thing is, oh, you have to outfox the competition. You have to beat them to a bloody pulp. You have to win, 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 win. And if somebody had raised their hand and said, excuse me, I'd like to talk about living and letting live, I strongly suspect they would have been wrestled to the ground, had a muzzle placed on them, and then put in the stocks in the middle of the courtyard for the rest of the afternoon.
While
But
you're
apparently,
tickling their
that's never
nose,
happened.
too. Yeah.
Yes. So, tell me about this topic. What what do you mean by it? How could this possibly work?
Well, it goes back to my roots of really working with entrepreneurs a lot. Being an entrepreneur like you, I find that's really the way to go, being an entrepreneur. And so Gina Carr, my partner who also went to business school, same place that you did, and found out that we would like to have something that talks about the idea of living your life freely as an entrepreneur. And we came up with the idea of agorapreneur. And so it's a word that we just kind of created because we can. So we did. And so agorapreneurs goes back to the idea of agora, which was based back in ancient Greece, open spaces, people living voluntarily with each other, interfacing in a very peaceful way with each other, and doing it in an entrepreneurial way. And I like the idea of live and let live. That's kind of the way that it really works, I think, best in life when we say, hey, Steve, you look like you have a right to live your life the way you want. You own your body. You can do what you want, as long as two conditions. Number one, you accept responsibility for what you're doing. And two, you do not harm another. You don't initiate force against someone. You don't hurt people. You don't take their stuff. And living that way is really what live and let live is all about. For me, it's a filter by which you can decide how do you make a decision on anything. Is this going to allow live and let live? And by using that as a filter, you can do a whole lot. So that's kind of, in a summary, what it's really all about.
So, is this something? I mean, right? I hate to like bring this back to market dynamics, right? But I'm thinking. I understand that at an individual level, right? I mean, at an individual level, well, in fact, at the risk of being excessively controversial to those who are watching, because we're not going to engage on this. um, but this is one of the things actually that we're currently embroiled in with the COVID-19 debate about things like mask wearing and so on, which is there are two competing sets of principles. One is the issue of personal freedom, and I should have the freedom to go where I want, do what I want to do, and not be subject to somebody else's dress code, right? If I don't want to
Hmm.
wear a mask, I shouldn't have to wear a mask. And there's a competing set of responsibilities, right? So that's the live part. And then there's the let live part. And the
Yes.
competing set of responsibilities has to do with what your effect on other people are. That I think I've heard something like something. Gosh, I forget, but something like your right to throw a punch ends at my nose or something.
Exactly. My father would say that just years ago, many years ago. My father would say, "Terry, your freedom ends where my nose begins." And I've heard that many times out there. And the idea is, okay, if we're in a physical situation and I'm swinging my arms, well, I have a right to do that. But if it hurts you and I physically hit you and harm you, well, that's not right. And you're hitting on something real important. It's a thorny issue because when you talk about a pandemic, hey, that's a little different. I can be whatever. I'm not an epidemiologist. We did not study a whole lot of epidemiology when I went to business school. Okay, they missed that part, but that's okay. But if I get close enough to you, and if I'm infected, I understand from really, really smart people who know about epidemiology that you can be harmed. You can pick up this nastiness that's there. How's that for a good scientific explanation? Then you pick up the nastiness. But I think, okay, at
Oh yeah.
that point, you are harming another. And so you can say a case can be made for, if let's say I own a restaurant, And you come into my restaurant, like, hey, Steve, we're glad to have you here. But everyone in my restaurant, we now say you must wear a mask or have some kind of shielding. And in my restaurant, this is what we want because we want to keep it safe. And you say, well, Terry, I'm not going to do that. And I say, well, then, Steve, that's really what I want. I want you here. And we're glad you're a customer, longtime customer. And we got some of your tastiest food ready to go. But if you're going to be in my restaurant, then here are the rules that you have to abide by. And I think that's what we have to look at. Who owns it? And how do we work this
So
out in a peaceful way so we can say, hey, I'm sorry, but why don't you sit over here? Or we've got a special section for those who don't want to wear a mask or, whatever. I think we ought to look at creative ways that we can get the work done that we need to do without harming someone. I like the way that Penn Jillette says it. He says, when we have a problem, how can we solve that problem and increase our freedom? So if you think, okay, that's the goal, we start thinking in that way and our minds are working toward that. We want to increase freedom and at the same time, of course, keep people safe.
so so to take this back into the marketplace for a second, because we specifically put the word entrepreneurs in our title about living and let living. It seems like in a market, like how do you do that? I'm imagining going up against Bill Gates in a marketplace, and right, Bill was pretty much notorious for being pretty darn cutthroat. I mean, one could even notice that he had lost the lawsuit, the antitrust lawsuit, because he did a lot of sleazy things. How would you take live and let live into a competitive environment? Because it seems like all it would take is one really nasty player who's willing to clobber you over the head, and your entire ability to live and let live just kind of like stops at that point, because it's a matter of survival, and you're going to get clobbered if you try to do that.
Yeah, I think you raise a very good point because let's suppose you're going up against someone like a Bill Gates and who's got at that, let's roll it back to, I don't know what the year would be, maybe 98, 99 or somewhere in there. Think about the time frame we were talking about when they were confronting all the legal issues. I think you would have to say, well, wait a minute. Here's the reality. We have to be pragmatists and realize we're going to live in reality. William James would be proud. We're going to look at pragmatism. We're going to embrace what works. And I would try to not compete directly head on with a Microsoft or a Google or Facebook or whoever it might be. Find something you can do over here in another place. And I think by using the right kind of live and let live attitude, you actually can gain an advantage because people don't like to deal with somebody who's, let's use the word ornery, or abusive. They're being abusive, then we want to stay away from them. And so I could be a competitor, but in a different area, in a different market than Bill Gates would be directly. And I find an alternative way to work with him. Matter of fact, you mentioned in business school, when they talk about being fierce, I actually had a professor in the MBA program I was in, and he talked about helping others and being a resource to them. So in other words, using niceness and compassion and help and inquisitive looking to find out about that. By the way, that professor, Dr. Stanley was really, really good. And he talked to us about doing a lot of things. He really profoundly shaped my life. Tom Stanley, by the way. And he went on later to write a series of books called The Millionaire Next Door. And I know the reason he did that was because I was his student. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, but I think
The
we
millionaire
can
next
get an
door.
advantage by using kindness, but also being aware. We're not going to sit back and be attacked. We have the right to defend ourselves.
That's interesting. So that brought up like a dozen different things for me. So I need to choose which one to go after. But certainly one of them is: have you ever read the book Marketing Warfare by Reese and Trout?
I read that, but it was about 3,000 years ago. I do remember it being very good. And I thought about that and the idea of warfare, and actually wrote a book where I came out and written a lot of articles where I say, I think if we use war as a metaphor for business, we're missing the point. It's really not war, because when you think about it, war in its literal sense, you're killing people and destroying things. And that's not a good end result. I use a different analogy that I've been talking about for a long time, where I talked about and wrote a book called Relationship Farming. I grew up in the Midwest, out in the country. We were not on a farm ourselves, but there were farms all around. A lot of my friends were there, and I'd go over and work on the farm, doing the chores and things like that. And I see the process that a farmer has to go through, which is very peaceful, a lot of hard work, and a whole process that they go through. And I think business is uses that as a metaphor is far better off than war, because particularly today, when you're coming out to hit somebody, hurt them, they can find the technology to hurt you. But if instead they realize, hey, when we deal with Stever, every time we work with this guy, he's nice. He helps us do better. We do better business when we work with Stever. That's a whole lot better approach and an environment to create than to have people fearing you, going, oh no, he might hurt us. He might get it. Well, we'll get him some way. It's human nature. So I think that there's actually a market competitive advantage by being kind, looking out for how we can help the other people, and everyone wins that way.
The marketing warfare concept that I was thinking of, and by the way, I share your distaste for that metaphor. I'm currently writing a book on marketing, and when I talk about the market you want to reach, I don't use the phrase target marketing, target market, or targeting your customers. I talk about who's your desired market and how do you reach your customers.
Nice.
And in the book Marketing Warfare, which obviously does use warfare as a parallel, in marketing warfare, one of the things that they talk about is the idea, I don't remember what they call it. They might call it flanking or something. I also read it 3,000 years ago, back when it was on stone tablets and required a whole bunch of people to turn the
It
pages.
was.
Very
Og
difficult.
gave it to me, right next to when he had this new thing called a wheel that he invented. It was really good.
Yes, if only they had mounted the pages on wheels so we could turn them
Yes.
more easily, but they didn't. So one of the things they talk about is if you want to get big, don't go head to head with the existing powerful players because they will simply win. But what you want to do is find someplace they're not paying attention and go win there. And I think clearly the poster child for this strategy is Walmart, because Walmart did not just go right into every major urban area and say, we're going to take over retail. Walmart started out in rural areas where there was no competition, where there wasn't any such thing as a big box store or someplace where people could find everything they needed. Once it had a really firm stronghold there, then it started moving into the cities. And by that time, of course, it was an unstoppable behemoth.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, you gave me an idea. And you know what I want to do? Something I don't do in interviews at all. But I've got something on my shelf back there I want to show you to illustrate that. Hold just a moment. I'll be right back. Here we go. And by the way, that's a first. I've never done
Well,
that in an
you are
interview
you are
before.
you are
But
frozen,
it
Terry, at
reminds me
least
of
on
something that
my
Dr.
end.
Stanley talked to us about. Seaver, do you see this right here? This is a
No,
genuine.
you are. There it is. There you are. Okay.
Yeah, this is a genuine mini ball. Now you might think, Terry, what in the world is a mini ball? This was used in the Civil War. You see this from the Battle of Atlanta. This is an actual mini ball named after a French general who invented it, General Mini, I guess, who he was. But what this was a very lethal weapon back in the Civil War, and both sides had a lot of them. It would tear trees down and put huge gaping holes in buildings and devastating things to human beings. And each side would have, I think the term was a bazillion of these, and they would shoot so many at each other that many of these would crash in the air from each side. There were so many of them, they would be crashing. And Dr. Stanley would tell us, when you find yourself in a market where there's so many people doing the same thing, you don't want that. You don't want to be in the many balls crashing in the air theory of marketing. Instead, you want to move over here, find a niche where they're not playing, and you do it. It's the old blue ocean strategy that we've heard, the same idea. But I remember these mini balls crashing in the air. That's why I put it over there to keep me reminded of that, what Dr. Stanley talked about. That, hey, this is something you don't want to do. And there's the real competitive advantage. You're living and you're letting live. We figure out a way to make the pie bigger and to really get along
It's
well. And I just think that's a real good strategy, particularly going forward into the 2020s.
so I actually hadn't thought about this for years and years and years, but I think this brings a very interesting illustration to your point. So for a long time, I helped at Harvard Business School. I helped run a business simulation that was one of the things the first year MBAs did. And this gave you the ability to be part of an entire business, in miniature for 3 days. And after every time you would get to go out and compete in the market, then we would debrief and teach you different business tools to use in running your business. Now, the teams did not have any internal knowledge of what the other teams were doing. So each team had to make their decisions about which markets to go after and which products to produce separately. And I ran this for 10 years. So I had seen lots and lots of groups do this.
Nice.
One year, All of the groups just happened to pick the same market to go after with the same product. So what happened was they were fiercely competitive. They worked their butts off. They used tons and tons and tons and tons of resources to try to eke out the tiniest little advantage. And overall, they did worse than any other group I had ever run.
Yep.
Another year, there was a group that, again, purely coincidentally, they just happened to choose different products and different markets. So each person, or not each person, each group became, in essence, a monopoly supplier in their market. And instead of getting into price wars, they avoided each other, and everyone did much, much better.
Yes.
And in fact, everyone did like as well as they theoretically could. And I remember contrasting those two things, saying, by far the quality of life for everyone, including the consumers, because the consumers were also, they worked at the company, at these related companies. So, so the money that was in the system, if there was more of the money, then it benefited everyone, not just the companies. I remember looking at this going, this is so amazing um, because the situation where everybody just coincidentally went into different markets and different products was by far the most successful case. However, if beforehand we had said to everyone, why don't you just divide up the markets and the products so that you get as much as is theoretically possible? Well, one team would have said, I want the expensive product and the big market. And then if the other team had gotten a smaller product in a smaller market, they would have said, well, but wait, why do they get the big product in the big market? That's not fair, right? And I would have that same reaction if I were in that situation too. But the non-intuitive thing is, if it happens by chance, we're all very happy with it because we experience a life of abundance. We experience a life of not having to compete and to claw and to scrape for every cent. It was very, very interesting. It was, about the power of, and it wasn't cooperation. That's the thing. It was the power of competition in a situation where it just so happens that everybody divvied up the pie. So anyway, I don't know if that was insightful or interesting, but
Oh, very
that's
much
what
so.
brought to mind.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And what you want to do is be creative. And I think today we've got the technology to do that better than ever, because now you can find that little niche where you're marketing for lawyers who specialize in people that have injuries on the north side of Boston in the summer when it's raining or whatever. You also have to be careful you don't get it that niche, but something like that. You get something so it's unique. And that means we've got to do our market research. We need to get out there and find out, okay, what's going on in the market? What are people looking for? And we got to go beyond a tendency that some of us entrepreneurs have every time. It's like, wow, by golly, I got a great idea. I'm going to go out and manufacture green widgets. And the market is saying, we don't need green widgets. Oh, but I like green widgets. And if I like green widgets, the whole market should want green widgets. Bzz, wrong answer, Terry. And so what we've got to do is be creative. And we've got to, I like the way my friend Chris Brogan says it. We have to grow bigger ears. We've got to
Wait, you're friends
listen
with
more.
Chris Brogan?
Yeah, Chris Brogan.
I'm friends with Chris Brogan.
He is a wonderful guy. Chris, if you're watching this, both of us are saying hello there.
We're both friends with Chris Brogan. Yay!
Yes. I like
And
the
if
way
you
he
don't
says,
know
grow
Chris
bigger
Brogan,
ears. We've got to listen more to what people are asking for. And also what they're not articulating quite so clearly, but you can tell they really do want something else. They just can't always express it. That's where the true entrepreneur who's going to win will do that, be creative, and go someplace where the others are not. I think you got to
see
look at that. And that goes back to the whole thing that we were talking about.
that's why I think that Steve Jobs was really a genius. Most of the products that he came out with were not, he wasn't the first to come out with those. I mean, he was the first to come out with that specific product. But, when he invented the iPod, or when Apple invented the iPod, and, he brought it to market, there were already other MP3 players. When they invented the iPhone, now there weren't smartphones in quite the same way, but there were Blackberries, and there were like he wasn't necessarily the first. Where I think his incredible genius was, and I do consider him in ways to be an absolute marketing genius.
Yes.
He was able to see, wow, we know people need smartphones because Blackberries exist, but there's this way of tweaking the smartphone to make it something special that people don't even know that they want. and he was just amazing at doing that. He did it with personal computers. For those people who are watching who don't know, Bill Gates got his start by writing BASIC for the Apple II. So, like, Steve Jobs is the one who invented the personal computer industry. Bill Gates just kind of piggybacked on him.
Hmm.
Then he did it with computer animation. He took this little niche studio, Pixar, and turned it into a global force for computer animation. And then he did it with MP3 players with the iPod. And then he did it with the iPhone. And then he turned software into a subscription service. And I look
Yep.
at these things and I just go, like, I would be hard pressed to name another human being at all who has transformed so many product categories. And he did it, as you say, by finding the things that people didn't know they needed and then giving
Yep.
it to them.
I'd be interested in your perspective on. So I know you're interviewing me, but also I'd like to, along that same line, I hear what you're saying. Steve came up with ideas that we weren't asking for: a phone and an MP4, MP3 player and apps all in one. People didn't know that, but he came up with it and did it. And for the longest time, Apple has been saying, we're not going to pay attention as much. We're going to come up with things that we think are great. And yet, I am talking to you now using my new baby, Stever. Arrived. We have a new little one in the house here. Arrived the other day at 4.7 pounds, my new MacBook Pro. And the new MacBook Pro is the M1. I've got the M1
Yes.
Max, and I just love it. It's great. The best computer I've had. But you know what they've done? Apple has gone back to things that their customers, like you and me, have been asking for. They improved the keyboard. They took out the, what was the thing called in the top row there that had
The touch
managed?
bar.
The what?
The
Touch
touch
bar?
bar?
Yeah, the touch bar. That's not on here, and I like it better. And a lot of others do too. And they've got other things they've done to this that are hearkening back to the way it was before. And so I think Apple has really perfected that nuance that you want to introduce some, but you also still need to, cheers to Chris again, grow bigger ears to listen to what customers are looking for. Seems like it would be that way. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting because since Steve Jobs passed, I have largely felt that Apple has lost their innovation edge. They've continued to innovate to some degree in hardware, and they're doing their own chips and things. But one of the other things that Steve Jobs said that I thought was a very wise saying, he's reported to have said to his programmers at one point, "No one wants to use your software. People want to have used your software." People aren't getting their joy from using the program and struggling through and trying to figure out how to put stuff in the spreadsheet. What people want is to have the answer to their problem. This is the company evaluation, or this is what our sales projections are, without with as little friction as possible. And I mean, Microsoft has just always been unbelievably bad at this. I think Microsoft, could win awards for bad UI design. Apple originally had superb UI design in the 80s and the early 90s. That's what they were known for. They actually had a book that was the Apple User Interface Guidelines that was brilliant. It was like a breakdown of cognitive psychology, of details about the interfaces, which have largely gotten lost. They have substituted design as a replacement for ease of use. So they think, oh, if it looks pretty, that must mean it's easy to use. And anyone who's ever used an iPhone where you have long presses and short presses, and you have on some models you press harder and it does something different, and there's not a lot of rhyme or reason. That part I think they've lost. And what I would love to see, if anyone from Apple is listening, what I would love to see is a return to really thinking about how do you make the experience so seamless that that I simply don't have to think about the device, right? It's always in my hand regardless, right? You don't have to addict me anymore. I'm addicted. I can't put this thing down. It's never more
Mhm.
than a foot away from me. However, make it transparent, and make it so transparent and so integrated into the way that I think and do things that if I even consider picking up some other smartphone, I'll use it for 3 seconds and then just go, oh my gosh, there is no way that I could possibly keep using this, because it's like this weird foreign body, trying to destroy my mind. And then keep innovating with the hardware and the software.
Yeah, I think that's what we have to do is we look at what is there. It's a combination, like so many things in life. And like for me, I love my iPhone. I've got an iPhone 11 and just have been using it. I love it. But I also have Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra. And the Note 20
Ooh.
Ultra is really nice. I like that S Pen that they have. And I think those kind of things are good. I think, gee, why doesn't Apple do that? Well, they don't have an S Pen. And by the way, on the new versions that they had with they never gave us, Samsung did not give us a Note 21. And I wish they would, but they do not include the S Pen on their new Fold, which is
What is an
something
S
I
Pen?
don't like.
What is an S Pen?
Oh, the S Pen. Well, here, it just so happens, this is something. Here's my Note 20 Ultra right here. It's real nice. And over here, I can pull out this S Pen, which gives me the ability to write on the screen, to tap, to move the cursor around, be able to take pictures with it, and do so many wonderful things. And it's like it's always there. If I want to take a note real quick, I can write it down. And so using cursive writing right here with this, and it's always there. I know that the pen is there wherever I go. I've got that with me. If I go, oh, that's a real good idea. And I don't even have to turn the phone on. If I go, oh, Steve, that's a great idea. Hold on. I pop it out, write it down on the screen, and it remembers it. That's something that is innovative. It's nice. And that's available on the Samsung. We don't have that on Apple. So I found for me, it's not either or, it's both and.
It's both.
And using,
Wait,
plus you
so
get extra geek points for having two.
I was about to say, yeah, I see. Now I've totally lost the thread of the business conversation. Now I just want to geek out. I'm like, wait, you mean you can write on that when it's turned off and
Oh
it's
yeah,
still
see right
captured
now,
the
see
note?
it's off. Okay, it's off, but
Yep.
ooh, just had a great idea. I want to write it down. So I whip out my pen and I'm putting on here, hi there,
Wait, I see it.
Stever. There we are. And so you can see now I just wrote that idea down right there. And I go, okay, I'll remember that. And what I do is I pop that back in. We go about our conversation in business, and it's appearing now as a Samsung Note on my form that I can organize, do what I want to with it later. Real easy and real nice.
That's actually brilliant. I like that idea a lot. Um, yeah, I'll tell you one of the things that I still think accounts for billions of dollars worth of lost productivity every year. Certainly just in my life, thousands and thousands of dollars, is just how bad the iPhone keyboards, and I can't speak for the Samsung, but just the keyboard is so bad compared to a real keyboard. And I love that about my BlackBerry. The keys were like, it was super easy to type on, and I could type rapidly and make no mistakes. And on the iPhone, even with the swipe keyboard, even with predictive typing, even with all of that, I feel like I'm slogging through molasses, which is one of the reasons I still have a desktop computer, because I can type 100 words a minute on my desktop. I probably can't even get over 20 or 25 on the. I've never timed myself, but I have difficulty believing that I could do that on the iPhone.
Well, Steve, we might have something that could help you today. Just having me as a guest. I just finished this on another live stream I was doing where I talked about some of the tools I'm using. Here's one that I use. You and I both go to a lot of conferences. We go to a
Yep.
lot of places where we're going to write down. I have this keyboard right here, and this is just an old clipboard. You see the clip on there? And I've
Yeah.
got a folding keyboard like this that costs, I think, something like 30, 35 bucks or something. And I take that, roll it out, and the keyboard is brilliant. It's wonderful. I can use it on my iPhone. I can use it on my Note 20 Ultra. I can use it on a host of whatever I pair it with, because it's Bluetooth. And it's got a little trackpad here, so I can use it as the mouse. Folds up very nicely. It's something like this is easy to carry. So that would be something I would encourage you, just for your consideration, to think about as a possibility to get that keyboard working right.
Do you have an affiliate link?
I do at terrybrock.com/resources. You'll see all the goodies that I have there. Shameless plug,
Got
where I
it.
have affiliate links and might get a few coins on it. So bounce over there and take a peek.
See, now this, by the way, you want to talk about live and let live. And we were talking about the idea of target marketing. And I think a lot of sales and marketing really does view the customer as an enemy. The idea is the customer has a bunch of money, they have it, we want it, and we're going to do what it takes to target them and get them to give us their money.
Yep.
And what you just did, we were geeking out. And you said, oh, look, I have this cool additional geek thing. My immediate impulse was, I want one of those. Oh, since Terry told me about it, I'm happy to pay him a commission. I asked you if you had an affiliate link, like just like that. And I realized that interchange actually itself exemplified what we were talking about at the start of this conversation, which is you weren't trying to sell me. I wasn't trying to buy. There was no resistance. We weren't in a war. You were just going, hey, Stever, look, let's geek out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that thing. That's a great little keyboard. I want to geek out on that. And then the next thing you know, I want to buy one. And that seems so much healthier and more fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. That is right. That is a brilliant example of live and let live. You live your life. I'm enjoying using that keyboard. I've used it a lot. I've bounced around seminars all over. I even use it here at home. When Gina and I are talking, sometimes I'll get an idea. I go, ooh, let me write that down. Now, I could use voice to put it in there, but sometimes a keyboard is just a little bit easier. So I use that and I like it. But you see, that's something that I know, given that you and I are a lot alike in many areas, you would enjoy that. Easy to carry keyboard. You'll see what it is, and it works really well. So I think those that are watching this, think about that, how you can really create a bigger pie. We follow that a lot at the National Speakers Association. Our co-founder of the organization, Cavett Robert, would often talk about build a bigger pie. Don't compete with each other. Here you get a bunch of professional speakers who have some big egos and like to say they're the best. Well, if we can figure out a way to make a bigger pie and everyone does better, I think that's a good way to do it. And you ultimately end up doing better all the way around, particularly in an environment that we have today sociologically with our world, that we say, okay, we like to see others succeed. And I think we're becoming much more entrepreneurial in our society, given that we're seeing the Great Resignation. People are saying, hey, I want to do things on my own. And this is where we have been historically, except for maybe the last 100 years or so with the Industrial Revolution, when people started leaving the farms where they were entrepreneurs, going into the city and working in factories and things like that. We were seeing a trend now. Some people that embrace it are going to embrace that entrepreneurial lifestyle, and the live and let live style really ties into that.
Well, Terry, thank you very much. And we are out of time. So we've come
only been
full
doing this for 2 minutes, though.
So how can people reach you and find out more about you and what you do?
Well, the best way to find out about me would be to go to the website. There I've got all the ways you can reach me on social media, et cetera, and that's terrybrock.com. And Terry and Brock can be spelled different ways. So it's Terry, and Brock is spelled the right way, Brock. So it's terrybrock.com, and you'll get all the information there.
Thank you very much for joining me. And for those of you watching, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.